Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we are doing part 3, the final part of the Dark Fina character review optimization. This is really getting into the nuts and bolts of how you can min-max her and really make her shine. So the topic of things today, I'm going to go over some cast time math because this is an important part of the timing of when she uses many of her abilities. I'm also going to go through the vision card, Esper Synergies, weapon optimization, the trust stone recommendations, all of which are kind of tied to the cast time math in some regard or the other. If you're just getting here, part 1 and part 2 was a whole variety of topics from base stats to total stats to ability breakdowns and AI and auto prioritization, a whole bunch of things, so check those out too if you want. But we're going to get right now into the cast time mechanics, and this is very important because it's got some big ramifications on how quickly you can get your abilities off or not. Now, the cast time metrics, we're going to go through how it actually functions from a charge time perspective. So cast time, not to be confused with charge time, same acronym. So CT, as we know it on this Mont screenshot, CT is charge time. That's really just when you get your turn order. Cast time is how long it takes before a spell goes off, and they are interrelated. So CT functions in ticks, essentially. And the way the game calculates this, each tick, 10% of your agility is added to your CT bar. And I'll get through this in a second. It'll be a lot more clear. But each tick, you also get your cast time added to the, well, say cast time bar. That's not something that actually exists, but go with me for now. The default cast time is 1,000. So basically what it means is you get your cast time and you just add it up every single tick till you reach 1,000, and I'll show this in a second. There's a variety of ways to reduce this threshold from 1,000 down to something lower so that the casts go off a lot quicker. Cast time is broken out to 2 different types though. So one is the, and these are dumb, the naming convention, none attack skill activation, which is TP based skill, so things like Kiraga and Full Life. And then there's attack skill activation, which is your offensive abilities, which are AP based. It's really the easiest way to remember it. So we're going to look at a hypothetical scenario here. So assume right now we have no cast time reduction, meaning Dark Fina has 1,000 cast time. We're going to say if she's facing off against an enemy Joker who's got 110 agility, not an absurd amount of agility, 1 versus 1, we're going to isolate them from the rest of the characters, and she wants to cast Dystopia, which has a 320 cast time. What actually happens here? So when she clicks Dystopia, before you click wait and finish your turn, we're going to call this time 0, tick 0. Joker's currently at 44 CT, so that's his CT bar before his turn activates, and Dystopia, because it's not end of the turn yet, we'll say is at 0. So it's at 0 tick. Now, the game will go 1 tick further once you finish your turn. Joker gets 10% of his agility, so you go from 44 to 55 on the CT. And you've now noticed that Dystopia gets the cast time added to the 0, so 320. If you can see here, neither Joker has his turn, nor can the ability go off yet, so the game just goes to the next tick. Next tick, it's 66 and 640. The third tick is 77 and 960. We're almost at that 1,000 threshold, but not quite yet. And it's on the 4th tick that we finally surpassed the 1,000 threshold. And it's at this time that Dystopia will finally cast. Now, what actually happens when Joker gets his turn in the same tick that the cast time goes off? I'm not 100% sure. It's really hard to test that in game, but I'm pretty sure the cast time supersedes the turn activation. But don't quote me on that. It'd be nice to have some confirmation. But you can see how this might be a bad thing, because if you break this down, Joker gains 44 CT during this full cast time, which means after the start of the cast, his CT was 56 or higher, 57 or higher. He'd get a turn before the cast time for Dystopia would finish, which is bad because either A, he can maybe kill Dark Fina or kill a teammate or do damage, or B, if you are using it and it's an AoE ability, a lot of times you can either target the unit or you can target the panel. If you target the unit, it'll follow them around. But if you target the panel, the enemy can move out of it. So what might happen is if you targeted the panel, a Joker might move out of it before you can actually get it off, which is obviously a very, very bad thing. So it's to your benefit to reduce the amount of time that the total cast time is so that you can cast it before the enemy gets their turn to come up. So attack skill cast time reduction, how you can actually do it. So you reduce the threshold from 1,000 to something lower, and there's a handful of sources to do so. So passive abilities like Dark Fina's Knowledge Reserve reduces them both by 200. Active abilities like the Scholar's Law of Speed Reading. You can do vision cards. The Other Me, which is her vision card, has an ability time reduction. Trust Stone passives also have it. Esper's like Siren and Valfor. And then Mastery abilities. Some characters innately have attack skill reduction times. Yuna is one of them. So there's some key takeaways here that you want to think of them as, we'll say, breakpoints. How much cast time reduction do you need so that you can cast things in a faster tick? And so we're going to look at the abilities here that Dark Fina can potentially use These are the list of the cast times for all of them. And basically, each of them have a different amount of ticks until they get off to the 1,000. If you were to break that out here, the slower ones, or the lower numbers, take longer. So Darka being the worst cast time, you only get 200 per tick. Takes 5 total ticks before it goes off. Magic Orb and Law of Disarmament are her fastest ones. They only take 3 ticks until they go off. Now, speaking frankly, and just kind of getting some of these off the board here, she's usually not going to use all 6 of these. There's really only 3 she'll likely use in practice, and you can kind of scratch these 3 off for the meantime, just to make things simple as well. So if we're looking at just these 3, what are some of the optimal setups you could use to get effectively lower cast time without sacrificing too much of your character build? Well, that's where these breakpoints come in. So essentially, let's look at Comet and Dystopia again first. Right now, it takes 4 ticks to get them off. But really, all you need, if you had 40 or 50 cast time reduction, which would lower it from 1,000 to 960 or 950, that means she could use either of these abilities in 3 ticks instead of 4. And that 1 tick difference, if you recall, is 10% of the enemy's agility on their CT bar. But you can go even further than that. Another threshold here, if you wanted to go from 4 ticks down to 2 ticks, means that if you reduced your cast time by 360, then your cast time would be 640, which is equal to this. So this is the breakpoints here, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. The first one, and to me this is kind of the more, we'll say, optimal, Comet Dystopia, I think 400 cast time down is enough, meaning reduce it by 2 ticks. And what that essentially means is you reduce your total cast time from 1,000 down to 600, which means by the second tick, 640 is obviously higher than 600, so it'll go off. And there's a couple easy ways to do this that I don't think takes a lot to sacrifice your character build. It's any combination of 2 of these 3 bullets, meaning either A, equip Valfor or Siren, B, have the Truststone passive max, or C, have her Knowledge Reserve passive. I think any combination of those 3 can flexibly do this. Now, there is something you can do even further if we did want to make this down to 1 tick instead of 2 ticks, which is essentially instacast. That means you have to reduce your total cast time down by 680. Now, in order to achieve that, you can still do it relatively easily. It's just you're going to handcuff yourself a little more in the build. So in order to reduce your cast time by 680, you're going to have to use all 3 of these above. So the Esper, the Truststone passive, and the Knowledge Reserves, and also have her Vision card equipped. Now, either in the main slot or the sub slot, because technically the sub slot, she will still get 80 cast time down. 80 plus 600 is 680. That's exactly 320 total cast time, which means these will go off in just 1 tick. But you can see how this limits the builds for her just a little bit if you're forced into an Esper, Vision card, a passive, and another passive. Now, for the Law of Geoabsorption, a little bit slower here, but there are still some really important thresholds you can do to make this cast a little faster. So to me, I think 600 cast time down is the most optimal for Geoabsorption, where you go down from 5 ticks down to 2 ticks. And in order to get that 600, all you really need to do is the combination of these 3 bullet points. And in order to make Geoabsorption basically an instacast, you would require some kind of buff, meaning a TMR or Scholar buff to drastically reduce it even further. But as you can see, there's a handful of ways you can do this relatively easily, as long as at the end of the day you have a cast time of 40 or more down. I think that's, if only because it reduces all 3 of these skills 1 tick. But that's enough for now. I think I've overloaded you with math and terminology. Hopefully that made sense, and hopefully you see the benefits of it in practice, where when you're going against very speedy comps, particularly because Dark Fina isn't the fastest character in the world, you want to make sure that when she does get her abilities off, they are very impactful. Now, the Vision card synergies, we're going to talk about the Other Me, which is just released yesterday. This is her Vision card, 252 HP, 182 magic, 4 spirit, bunch of effects on this. So for dark units, AoE resistance of 10 and spirit penetration of 10. For Fina in particular, it's a magic of 30% and decrease the activation time by 100. Now for the party, it's also increased magic 50%, dexterity 18%, and the missile resistance 20%. This is a very good card. This is a very unique card, though, in that I think it's one of the first that is probably not the best card for the character, even though it's her own card. More often than not, these Vision cards really take characters and elevate them to a completely different kind of profile. I don't really think this one does it, to be honest. And when you're talking about forming a comp, if she's your only magic unit, I actually think there's better combinations of things here. So to me, the best Vision card for Dark Fina is a loyal companion for a variety of reasons here. So number one, for the team in general, the AoE resistance of 20 on this card cannot be understated how important that is. But number two, although you're missing out on some of the magic percentage buff, you're still getting magic attack 18 and crit rate of 25, meaning if she crit hits more often, she still does more damage. She still gets 10% magic, but overall, this card is almost a must in the modern game for any kind of dark comp you're going to run, which begs the question, well, what's the best sub-Vision card? Now, I think the Dark Fina card does have a case to be made, but I also think Black Rose the Battlefield certainly does too as well, where you do want the agility still at the end of the day for your characters to make them much faster, and you get the upside of potentially using Shadow Flare as well, which is another AoE ability to add to her arsenal, which is the AoE resistance down, which really does pair well with a lot of the AoE damage types that her teammates will often use. Now, there's a legitimate amount of theory crafting that needs to be done whether or not you enable Shadow Flare or not, because it's got some extra range that you might not want, so she's not attacking too early. But I think both of these are really strong ones to consider, despite the fact that the Dark Fina card is a good one. It's really only if you start using more than one magic unit in your comp that you're going to be able to use the upside of all of these. Now, some other good vision cards, which I don't think sacrifice a ton, I do think Diabolos, Bloody Moon, and Fleeting Blossom Banquet actually do have some good ones, where the Blossom Banquet, I know it sounds surprising, but the unit does get some light resistance on there as well. The acquired AP is great for the teammates that they can spam abilities a lot easier, but then it's also crit damage of 25 as well. So when you're talking about the Dark cast that needs to kill things very fast, a lot of extra AP, a lot of extra crit damage, really the way to do it. But Diabolos and Bloody Moon, Black Rose the Battlefield, Loyal Companion, Dark Fina, all amazing cards for her. But I can't stress enough, Loyal Companion is really the best in slot for her, unless you're using another magic unit, which you could certainly put that on them instead. Now for the Esper Synergies, there's a handful and some that you maybe not be surprised to hear. So there's some dark-oriented ones, which I think you should really think about, which isn't always the case. Bloody Moon and Diabolos, the really nice thing about these two Espers is that they have dark attack up. And there's a really important reason why you want that, because A, it helps to incentivize Dystopia instead of Comet. One of the things that is kind of a conundrum is that because one of her main abilities is unit resistance down of 30, it means that she'll tend to prioritize Comet because it does more damage than Dystopia. But it's arguably that Dystopia is a better ability and that it's a double hit, so it can chain easier with your teammates, and the stop effect is really devastating. So unless you just flat out turn Comet off, which certainly is an option, the dark modifiers at least help balance the damage equation a little bit. Not to mention the Law of Geoabsorption is not a magic type attack, it's a strike type attack. So although it scales off her magic stat, it doesn't get any benefit if you have magic attack modifiers. So if you do dark attack instead, the Law of Geoabsorption will benefit from the dark attack up. So there's a really great time and place for why you want these. It's just that they skew maybe a little bit slower than some of the other Espers. Now some other really good ones here are Valfor and Siren for the cast time reductions, and they both do different things in terms of reductions in agility and magic stats, but overall really solid ones as well. Bahamut is obviously one of the most well-rounded magic Espers in the game, the fastest one for her as well, so really great option. And then finally, if you are gearing for some of that extra accuracy, where if you consider, you're going to take off the accuracy passive to have knowledge reserves, let's say, for the cast time down, well, you might want that accuracy somewhere else, and Typhon, Shiva, and Removal all offer that while still having the magic attack up, and Typhon having the pure magic percentage up. So all of these are good options. There's definitely a few more, but without getting too deep, I think you're pretty safe choosing from any of these. Now for the weapon optimization, boy, rods and staves are probably the most complete set of weapons in the game. And to me, there is no best in my opinion, but all situational. I'll go through some of my favorites, if not all of them. So to me, the Lemure TMR is one of the best ones here. A lot of magic for a TMR, 10 unit resist, also especially impactful. Also frees up some flexibility on the main two slots to equip some other items. I also like the Cypress Pile, great for that extra 20% magic resistance penetration, so it gives her 40 total with her mastery ability, but obviously not every character has a very high magic resistance, so you may not always get the full benefit of this, so definitely matchup specific, which many of these are. Doom Twilight, really only good for pesky counter abilities, meaning if you are targeting certain teams that have game-changing counters, well, this is one that you probably do want then. But honestly, this is probably on the lower tier. Guard Stick, kind of the same idea, 8% magic resistance. There's enough magic resistance penetration that you're not going to get the full 8% there, so really not all that impactful either. The Shell TMR is a very good one, always has been, obviously, but 108 magic, 15 spirit penetration, and 10 magic attack. So I like this for the well-roundedness of it as well. Another great TMR option. A Magistral Rod also is a decent one. It does have some overlap, though, with Truststone passives. That's a little bit redundant when you +6 it. And the Evoke boost has shown to be not terribly material in the battle. If your battles are going long enough that you're casting an Esper, usually not a good thing. So this one's fair. It's not bad. It's just a lot easier and accessible to get the resistances pretty easily. The Platinum Rod, to me, staggeringly good 10% agility, but the HP stipulations do have limits on it for Dark Fina because you typically run Dark without a real tank, so there are odds that she gets hit by stuff, so your HP reduced, and so you lose that agility buff. But because she is a slower character overall, this is a very, very good one. Shadow Dragon Staff is also very matchup specific, just for the light killer. really the only instance you would use that. And then finally, the Valgy's staff, good for some more consistent spear penetration, but she doesn't really need it considering what she already has in her kit and passives. To me though, if you were to look at all of these, and even the ones that I haven't included, my favorites really are these four. So the 2 TMR options I think are exceptionally good. The Cypress Pile definitely is nice, and the Platinum Rod is probably one of my other favorites. For those of you that have the Sage Rod as well, the high magic stat on that can't be understated either. It's just very hard to achieve the proper level of that weapon, so I haven't included it here. But I think these four are really good bets for her overall. Which finally brings us to Trust Zone recommendations. And quite honestly, this is a tough one for Dark Fina because she does so much well already. There are some recommendations, but there is no clear-cut best. So HP, definitely a solid choice for her. Solid choice for everybody. Never a bad time to use it. The defense and spirit ones, though, I do like for specific matchups. And again, the upside to these has always been the healing power, not necessarily the defense and the spirit, but this is really where you need to min-max a little bit if you're wearing a piece of armor or not. Is your TMR the armor instead, in which case these get a lot more value because you can add the defense and spirit without it getting cut in half. But the healing power I like in particular for her counter ability, the counter cure, which if you recall from part 2, does a lot of healing. So if you can get healing power up, it will regenerate a fair amount more of her health when she procs it. So that's a really impactful part of these. And finally, I do think the luck is a decent one where if you are running Hyper Evade Dark, she is the very bottom tier of what is achievable for evasion. So this definitely will be a necessity if you're trying to accomplish that, but also helps the accuracy as well. And for the passives on the left side, really nothing terribly crazy or special. HP, Luck, and Crit Evade are 3 that I think should always be on every character if you can. But to me, the only other one that you really need to hunt for to me is the Magic debuff resistance. Because she has such a high base magic stat, when you reduce her magic, that's actually a pretty big hit to her total magic stat as compared to other characters who get it from sources that don't scale with the debuff. So I think it's a good one to hunt. And obviously some of the other status effect ones, I really like the stop resistance as well for those mirror matchups where you can have a little bit of stop resistance so enemy Dark Finas won't consistently stop you either. So I think it's a good one. I just haven't listed it here. But for the right side, boy, it's just, there's really no right answer here. So the magic one is obviously great if you just want to make her min-max her magic stat. Certainly time and place, but she's got enough magic and spirit penetration already. I don't know if it's going to really bring her to any kind of different tier. The accuracy one I do like a lot as well, depending on the passes you have equipped, where if you want that extra 15. And then finally, at the end of the day, I think the agility one is still probably the best one, where you can get 6 agility total when you put 3 stones on her. This is definitely, I think, the one that I go for the most often. Now for the passives, though, there's really too many to choose from. There's legitimately not a best 6, but some of my favorite 6 right off the bat here, the magic 20%, the dexterity of 15%, I think are all the time. Unless you use Galmia Cloak a lot, you won't get that full magic percentage in because the Galmia exceeds it. But I think overall, those are 2 safe ones. I like the Dark Attack and Strike Attack if you are spamming Law of Geoabsorption. I have these 2 on my own Trust Stone that essentially allows her to do some extra damage. And again, when you're talking about incentivizing certain abilities over others, the fact that you can increase the Dark Attack and Strike Attack helps her prioritize Law of Geoabsorption over maybe something like Comet in certain scenarios. But then finally, the Healing Power is another one of those ones where if you are really relying on the Counter Cure to bump up her health, this, with the defense and spirit runes, will significantly increase the HP restored. And the must one for me here is the attack skill activation time of 200. If nothing else, you should always have this Trust Stone passive on. At the very least, it means you reduce all your spells by 1 tick for her. So that's a must. But really, other than that, it's all equipment specific based upon what you have equipped, because you could easily make a case for magic attack, spirit penetration, magic attack, resistance penetration, crit damage, and crit rate. All of those, though, really factor in depending upon what you already have equipped for a weapon, which, as we saw, there's like 10 of them. So there really is no best. It's really dependent upon what you have equipped. But at the very least, the attack skill activation time is a must. But that's it for Dark Fina Part 3. This is an interesting character. I don't know if the current arena and Guild War map are best for what she can possibly achieve. She's very buff reliant, so maybe a map with just a little bit more length tends to benefit her more, which is obviously a really nice addition to the game, particularly when you consider the ability to dispel Runic Shield off of Celeste and really take on that water meta comp and do something a little bit different than Black Rose Elena, who relies on just kind of a different set of skills and attacks than Dark Fina does. Hopefully this is insightful, informative, this is a lot of fun to do, and I will talk to you all soon.